The Curtiss P-40 Warhawk entered service in 1940 as America's primary pursuit fighter. Over 13,700 were built. It served with the Flying Tigers in China, where its shark-mouth nose art became one of World War II's most recognizable symbols. The Bell P-39 era Cobra entered service in 1941 with a 37mm cannon, firing through propeller hub. Over 9,500 were produced. Though limited at high altitude for Americans, the Soviet Union used it devastatingly on the Eastern Front. The Lockheed P-38 Lightning entered service in 1941 as America's first long-range fighter. Over 10,000 were built. A P-38 shot down Admiral Yamamoto's transport over Bougainville in 1943, one of the most consequential aerial kills of the war. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt entered service in 1942 as the heaviest single-engine fighter of World War II. Over 15,600 were built, making it the most produced American fighter of the war, excelling in both air superiority and ground attack roles. The North American P-51 Mustang entered service in 1942 and transformed the air war over Europe. Over 15,000 were built. With drop tanks and a Merlin engine, it became the first fighter capable of escorting bombers all the way to Berlin. The Grumman F-6F Hellcat entered service in 1943 as the Navy's direct answer to the Japanese Zero. Over 12,200 were produced. Hellcat pilots were credited with over 5,100 aerial kills, accounting for roughly 75% of all Pacific Theater victories. The Vought F-4U Corsair entered service in 1943 with its iconic inverted gull wing. Over 12,500 were built. Its combat lifespan extended into Korea a decade later, making it one of the few piston fighters to bridge both wars. The Lockheed P-80 Shooting Star entered service in 1945 as America's first operational jet fighter, arriving too late for World War II. Over 1,700 were produced. It laid the foundation for American jet aviation and evolved into the T-33 trainer. The North American F-86 Sabre entered service in 1949 and defined the Korean War in the air. Over 9,800 were built worldwide. F-86 pilots maintained a roughly 10-to-1 kill ratio against MiG-15s over MiG-Alley, establishing American jet dominance. The Lockheed F-94 Starfire entered service in 1950 as America's first all-weather jet interceptor, built on the T-33 airframe. Over 850 were produced. It served as the nation's primary night air defense platform during the Cold War's most anxious early years. The Republic F-84 Thunderjet entered service in 1947 as the backbone of the early U.S. Air Force. Over 7,500 were built across all variants. It flew thousands of Korean War ground attack missions and served as NATO's primary tactical nuclear delivery aircraft. The McDonnell F-2H Banshee entered service in 1948 as one of the Navy's earliest carrier jet fighters. Over 890 were built. It flew combat missions in Korea and became the first jet aircraft operated by the Royal Canadian Navy. The Grumman F-9F Panther entered service in 1949 as the Navy's primary jet fighter during Korea. Over 1,380 were built. The Panther flew the Navy's first jet combat mission of the war and evolved into the swept-wing F-9F Cougar. The Douglas F-3D Skyknight entered service in 1951 as the Navy's first purpose-built jet night fighter. Over 265 were built. It became the first jet aircraft to shoot down an enemy jet at night, killing a North Korean aircraft in 1952. The North American F-100 Super Sabre entered service in 1954 as the world's first supersonic fighter capable of level flight. Over 2,290 were built. It served extensively in Vietnam, logging more combat hours than any other American aircraft in that conflict. The McDonnell F-101 Voodoo entered service in 1957, originally designed as a bomber escort before becoming a nuclear-capable strike fighter. Over 800 were produced. Its RF-101 reconnaissance variant flew critical photographic missions over Cuba during the 1962 missile crisis. The Convair F-102 Delta Dagger entered service in 1956 as the world's first supersonic delta-wing interceptor. Over 1,000 were produced. Its development pioneered the area-rule fuselage redesign that finally allowed the prototype to break the sound barrier in level flight. The Grumman F-11F Tiger entered service in 1956 as the Navy's first supersonic carrier fighter. Over 200 were built. The Tiger one-shot itself down when it overtook its own cannon shells during a live-fire test flight in 1956. The Lockheed F-104 Starfighter entered service in 1958, famously described as a missile with a man in it. Over 2,570 were built globally. It became the first aircraft to simultaneously hold both the world's speed and altitude records. The Republic F-105 Thunder Chief entered service in 1958 as the largest single-seat combat jet ever built. Over 830 were produced. In Vietnam, the Thud led strike missions into North Vietnam's deadliest defenses and suffered the heaviest American aircraft losses of the war. The Convair F-106 Delta Dart entered service in 1959 as the pinnacle of American interceptor design. Over 340 were produced. The Delta Dart remained in frontline air defense command service until 1988, an extraordinary operational lifespan driven by its unmatched speed and performance. The Vought F-8 Crusader entered service in 1957 featuring a variable incidence wing that tilted upward for slower carrier approach speeds. Over 1,200 were built. Navy and Marine pilots compiled an 18-to-3 kill ratio against North Vietnamese MiGs in aerial combat. The McDonnell Douglas F-4 Phantom II entered service in 1960 as a defining multi-role jet of its generation, serving the Air Force, Navy, and Marine simultaneously. Over 5,100 were built. Vietnam combat exposed the critical need for an internal cannon in close-range dogfights. The Northrop F-5A Freedom Fighter entered service in 1963 as a lightweight supersonic fighter built for export to American allies. Over 1,400 were delivered. Its exceptional handling later made it the preferred aggressor aircraft at the Navy's elite Top Gun training program. The General Dynamics F-111 Aardvark entered service in 1967 as the world's first variable sweep wing production aircraft. Over 560 were built. Despite early Vietnam losses, it matured into a precision strike platform that performed devastatingly during Desert Storm operations. The Northrop F-5E Tiger II entered service in 1973 as an upgraded freedom fighter with improved engines and greater maneuverability. Over 1,400 were built globally. The Tiger II became the definitive dissimilar air combat training aircraft throughout the Cold War era. The McDonnell Douglas F-15A Eagle entered service in 1976, built around one mission: air superiority. Over 1,500 Eagles were produced across all variants. The F-15 compiled an air-to-air record exceeding 100 kills with zero combat losses anywhere in the world. The General Dynamics F-16A Fighting Falcon entered service in 1978 as a lightweight, agile, multi-role fighter born from the Air Force Lightweight Fighter Competition. Over 4,600 have been produced globally. Its fly-by-wire system and relaxed static stability set the template for all modern fighters. The McDonnell Douglas F divided by a -18A Hornet entered service in 1983 as the Navy's first true carrier multi-role aircraft. Over 1,400 Legacy Hornets were built. It performed with distinction from Desert Storm through Afghanistan and Iraq across nearly 3 decades of continuous combat. The Lockheed F-117A Nighthawk entered service in 1983, classified until 1988 as the world's first operational stealth aircraft. Exactly 64 were built. On the opening night of Desert Storm, it struck targets in central Baghdad without a single loss. The McDonnell Douglas F-15E Strike Eagle entered service in 1988 as a dedicated all-weather deep strike variant with conformal fuel tanks and a rear seat weapons officer. Over 460 were built. The Strike Eagle has been in continuous combat from Desert Storm through Syria and beyond. The Boeing F divided by a -18E Super Hornet entered service in 1999 as a larger, redesigned evolution of the Hornet with 25% more internal fuel and improved range. Over 600 have been delivered. It remains the U.S. Navy's primary strike fighter aboard every active carrier today. The Boeing F-18G Growler entered service in 2009 as the Navy's dedicated airborne electronic attack aircraft built on the Super Hornet airframe. Over 160 were delivered. It replaced the EA-6B Prowler and gave carrier strike groups a supersonic self-escorting jamming platform. The Lockheed Martin F-22A Raptor entered service in 2005 as the world's first fifth-generation stealth air superiority fighter, combining supercruise and sensor fusion. Only 187 were built. It remains the most capable pure air superiority fighter ever to enter operational service worldwide. The Lockheed Martin F-35B Lightning II entered service with the Marines in 2015 as a short takeoff and vertical landing joint strike fighter variant. Hundreds have been delivered. The F-35B restored fixed-wing strike capability to amphibious assault ships without requiring full carrier flight decks. The Lockheed Martin F-35A Lightning II entered service with the Air Force in 2016 as a conventional takeoff joint strike fighter variant, replacing aging F-16s. Over 600 have been delivered globally. It combines stealth, sensor fusion, and multi-role flexibility in a single fifth-generation airframe. The Lockheed Martin F-35C Lightning II entered service with the Navy in 2019 as a carrier-based joint strike fighter variant, with larger folding wings and a reinforced undercarriage. Hundreds are on order. The F-35C gives carrier air wings a stealthy strike capability they never previously possessed. The Boeing F-15EX Eagle II entered service in 2021 as the most advanced Eagle variant with digital fly-by-wire controls and open mission systems architecture. It carries the largest weapons payload of any American tactical fighter. The Air Force ordered it to complement the F-35 on permissive strike missions. The Northrop Grumman B-21 Raider entered service in 2023 as America's next-generation stealth bomber, though classified details remain limited. Designed to penetrate the most advanced air defenses on Earth, it represents the future of American long-range precision strike and will eventually replace both the B-1 and B-2 fleets. The next-generation air dominance F-47 was announced in 2025 as America's sixth-generation air superiority fighter designed to replace the F-22 Raptor. It is expected to incorporate artificial intelligence systems, directed energy weapons, and the ability to command autonomous loyal wingman drone aircraft in contested airspace.